Sophia. Welcome to This is Horror.
Thank you for having me. I am a long-term fan, like a lot of guests that have been on here. So I'm excited to finally get to chat with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you too. And as you probably anticipated to begin with, I want to know what some of the early life lessons were that you learned growing up.
Oh my goodness. I think one of the things that I think about recurrently, like on Sunday, I'm going to be 35. So thinking back on like earliest life lessons, one of the things that I find was most important to me was trying to have deep and meaningful explorations of different types of art and different interests throughout my life. Um, I tried a patchwork of things throughout my life in terms of like careers, in terms of hobbies. I went from like fine art to photography to being a concert photographer to being a professional dominatrix. I worked in retail. I was a tarot reader. I'm a metalsmith. There's like a medley of things. And I think exploring all the little avenues that interest you in life help to make you, I don't know, more truly understand yourself. And then if the ultimate goal is, writing work or to just self improve, let's say, um, I think that that puts you closer to the horizon of whatever that is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it sounds like, already that's such a broad array of different jobs that you've had. And so, my understanding is at the moment, as you said off air, in addition to writing, you are a metalsmith. So, when did that come into play? When did you begin in that area? When did you decide this was the pursuit for you?
Um, I started in maybe around 2010, 2011. I was pursuing a BA in East Asian Studies and in gender and sexuality studies. And I was doing academia partially because I thought that that was just what you did when you know, graduated high school. I'm based in Quebec and we have something called CEGEP here, which is you graduate in 11th grade and then what would be 12th grade um, for 2 to 3 years, you specialize in a certain, it's not necessarily a degree, it's like a diploma, it's more like a college. And I studied graphic design. And then I was like, oh, after that, the thing to do typically at the time uh, was to continue academic studies. Everyone was saying, you can't really get a job in a field unless you have at least a bachelor's. And so I was doing that. And it was interesting to me personally to study these things, but I wasn't sure career wise if that was going to lead anywhere. And so I started taking once a week evening classes, just metalsmithing at like a local arts center. And initially I hated it because when you're starting anything, unless you're like preternaturally talented with something, you're going to be bad at it. And it sucks to have a vision for something and suck at it. Um, and so I started doing that and eventually learned different techniques like wax carving and integrating gemstones into my work. And like weirdly, someone saw some of the work that I was posting on like an old Blogspot account. I don't know how on earth that happened. But they commissioned me. And after that, I was like, oh, is this a viable career? Um, and it was like a weird serendipitous thing where like I had seen at the time um, like a job listing for a local jeweler who was looking for someone. So I ended up working for her as like a bench jeweler, which is just you're doing someone's production. Um, and then yeah, the rest is history, as they say. It was just a nice way to work with my hands and be creative, and it felt like the amalgamation of a lot of things that I enjoyed in my life.
And so at that point, does that mean you went from academia straight to metalsmithing? Metalsmithing? Is that the verb? I don't know. I'm not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. I do a lot of like goldsmithing, but I do work with silver as well. So I just like broadly call it metalsmithing. Um, Pretty much is the answer to that. I was like, um, career wise, working at Sephora, and then I was also working as like a part time dominatrix. And I was like, those don't feel like long term career industries that I want to stay in personally, even though they were like interesting and fun to me, especially at the time. Um, so it's sort of like funneled over the course of maybe like 2 or 3 years. And then in 2015 is when I started the brand that I have now. It's called Sofia Zakia, which is just like my first name, middle name. And I started off with making silver pieces because it was all that I could afford. And then eventually moved on to gold pieces, which is like making a lot of bridal wear, which ended up being, I don't know, I caught the weird tail end of like when social media wasn't the hellscape necessarily that it is now. Um, and instead of having to go through having your work sold at retail stores and going to trade shows and all of these things, you could all of a sudden sell directly to consumers. And so I like was able to hit that timing really nicely in a way that allowed me to build the brand to what it is today, which allowed me to then like have enough time to do writing, which is like has been a passion of mine since I was like early teens, but has grown into something that I've done a lot more concretely into my like 20s and 30s.
And so fast forwarding all the way to today, what does a typical day or a typical week look like for you in terms of the balance between writing and metalsmithing? And indeed, I don't know, maybe there's another sideline that you have as well, seeing as you've done so much.
It feels so messy at times. Like I was listening to some of the other podcast episodes this week and listening to guests talk about their um, writing schedule and their writing routine. Um, and my routine feels as though it's a little bit more atypical because I have to follow the sort of trends of the jewelry industry, which is like over the holidays, we get a big batch of orders because it's like Black Friday sale will happen. A lot of people want to get engaged over like New Year's Eve. And so I have to take almost uh, like a blackout period from writing, which has been interesting. Like before I was more traditionally published, it didn't really matter as much. But then once you have work that's traditionally published, then there's like the external factor of people that are depending on you and wanting to know timelines and um, committing to certain timelines. So, in terms of like, what does a week look like? I usually have to plan out certain days where I'm only doing jewelry or I'm only doing writing because I tend to be more focused and attentive like at the start of my day from like 9 to noon, and then I'll get like another burst of energy at like 7 p.m. Um, but if I do like jewelry work in the morning, I'm not going to have there'll be like too much brain fog to do writing or like creative related work in the evening. Um, I don't know if that's like similar for you. I know some people are like early birds, they get up at like 5, some people are night owls, but for me it's like if I don't do my like big focus thing first thing in the morning, it's almost like the day is like gone.
It's actually really similar for me. So I get up pretty early, but then I need to front load the day with creative tasks
Mhm.
because if I wait till the afternoon, like I'm just in a slump. That energy has gone. So I try to put, yeah, the creativity at the start of the day, and then the kind of less enjoyable admin and marketing and just all the writing tangential things that you kind of have to do. But
Mhm.
I don't know, they're just not as satisfying because for me, what I love is writing. If I could write all the time, that would be it. But then I'd have a lot of books, but nobody would know about them. So, you know,
Yeah.
it's it's this eternal dichotomy and this dance really between creativity and then practical things where you might actually be able to make some money. And the other difficulty too is that, particularly in terms of selling books, the goalposts are always changing. I mean, you alluded to social media at the moment, obviously, with I don't even know what we're going to say about Twitter and X. Do we call it an implosion? Do we call it an absolute clusterfuck of epic proportions? It's everything. But 5 years ago, it was a really good way of getting the word out.
Mhm.
Now, social media has fragmented into many platforms, so we're all doing this bizarre dance where we post on about five platforms, get a little bit of engagement on all of them, but I don't think cumulatively it's anywhere near what we would have got on Twitter when it was called Twitter and it was a relatively nice place.
Yeah, I when you were saying that, I was thinking on the, like, jewelry thing that I was saying earlier where I hit this weird perfect timing of, like, starting my brand when Instagram specifically was, like, a great place for independent artists to be showcasing their portfolio directly to people, and it feels like Twitter was that sort of place for authors, like, everyone in the publishing industry felt as though it was this community space, um, and now, like you had mentioned, it feels really fractured in a way where you're putting out all of these announcements or posts or thoughts that, you know, would have maybe gained more traction on Twitter, but now it feels like there's so much more energy that has to go into promoting your work on all of these different platforms, and it's just not as effective. And so I don't know if it's just me. I highly doubt that it is, but there's this fatigue that feels like it's happening, um, where there's just so much to do as an author. Like, it makes sense that you're expected to have an author platform nowadays. But the way in which it's so fractured now, and like people building audiences on X have to go, over to Blue Sky or Threads or wherever else. And then with like TikTok shutting down, and like that was the place for book talk. And it's just like, how many times can you like restart the platform for your career? It feels so endlessly exhausting. And this is like coming from someone who I like very much grew up on the internet. I like saw the death of LiveJournal and Blogspot and like all of these different social media apps and like Tumblr. And I'm just like, I feel like an old lady just being like, I'm so sick of this shit. Like I can't do this one more goddamn time, you know?
Nobody has mentioned LiveJournal for a long time now. That brings me back to almost the MSN days and AOL Instant Messenger. It was around that era too.
Hmm.
But yeah, goodness, I know what you mean about the fatigue of posting to social media as well. And that's another reason why I front load the day with creativity, because if I'm doing marketing, then it just zaps. It zaps energy, it zaps enthusiasm. And And to
Mhm.
be quite honest, I feel more depressed. I don't enjoy life as much. Um, I think particularly because if I'm writing, then I know at the end of that session, I have achieved something. I've got something out of it. But if
Mhm.
I spend a few hours posting things on social media, queuing things up, sending promotional emails out, there's absolutely no guarantee that that will amount to anything good. And I kind of feel like it's almost like if I'm writing, I'm fueling my body with good, healthy food. But if I'm just doing stuff on social media, it's like just stuffing the most inedible donuts into my
Mhm.
into my mouth, into my face hole, and there's nothing good that will come of it.
It's not as fulfilling. It,
Yeah.
like, the connections don't feel necessarily as deep, and then it becomes like an existential question where you're like, "What am I doing with my life?" Because it feels like you're running on a treadmill. You're like it makes sense where any creative thing that we put out there feels like a sort of scream into the void, um, waiting for something to sort of echo back, but, so much of it feels very, like, rote now, where it's like, is there even anything, like, any sound that's coming back at all? And so, I think what we're gonna see, in the, like, near future is a lot of people going back to more analog relationships and, like, with each other and with their work. Um, there's an author, his name is Jacob Wren, and when I did the Montreal launch for my novella Coup de Grâce, he was one of the people who interviewed me. Um, brilliant, brilliant author, very, like, dry in a very funny way, very interesting man, has, like, an old flip phone, and that's it. Um, and so I think there's a lot more people moving back to this sort of, like, dumb phone, uh, state where, um, initially smartphones, it was like, okay, cool, you have access to, like, Google Maps and, notes apps and being able to take photos, and then now it's like there's too many things that it does to the point where it's like everything is constantly vying for your attention. And like you mentioned, like, if you don't focus your creative energy at the start of your day, it's just going to seep it out of you, whether or not you're doing that, like, tangential marketing work. um, One of the, like, fault lines that I found myself repeatedly falling into, like, especially over the summer, was like, oh, just watching videos or, like, seeing what's going on in the industry is gonna, like, keep me up to date, and that's gonna make me a better writer or, like, better at marketing. And then it was like a weird delusion that I was, you know, telling myself, where the reality is it's just like, um, I'm making my brain more lazy and seeping my ability to think critically, uh, because at the end of, like, a long work day, the last thing that I wanna do is have to focus again on something else. So, like, the fun dopamine hit thing is to just be like, "Oh, technically I'm keeping up to date with the community in the industry, but, at what cost?"
Yeah, and talking about kind of being up to date and marketing and things pertaining to that, I wonder when you got the deal with Titan and you shifted towards a more traditional publisher, how did that change the dynamic both in terms of your approach to writing and also to marketing? What are the kind of things you're doing? What are the things that Titan are doing, and how much are they actually directing what you do?
It was an interesting process that actually, when I initially signed the contract, I started filming these, like, almost video blogs, partially for myself and partially if I ever wanted to, like, share my experience of like what it was like for the first time trying to go through the process of like finalizing cover art and going through the developmental edits with an editor and going through the copy edits and then going through marketing and then interviews and award seasons and things like that. Um, and I love to get sort of hyper fixated on something. And I think that marketing is quite interesting, at least to me personally. And so I had this Excel document that I had created that was like 10 sheets, and each sheet was a different thing where it was like, here are all the people that I would love to send ARC copies to. Here are places that I would love to focus on interviews. Here are a list of subjects that I would be willing to talk about, or like listicles that I could do. Here are awards that this might possibly be eligible for. It was like so many little breakdowns of things. Um, and Titan is excellent. I highly recommend them as an author. I have had nothing but good experiences with my editor on the project, who is Daniel Carpenter, um, and their marketing team. Um, but I love to also be very hands on, and it's hard to let go of things and trust that things are happening behind the scenes when you don't have visuals on them. So I ended up doing a lot of things on my own as well, um, where it was uh, like reaching out to people that might have seemed like a pipe dream for like blurbs, or potentially working together. Like I was lucky enough to have um, I worked together with an artist friend of mine, Chris McAllister, made like over a minute long animated trailer for the book launch, which I just absolutely fell in love with. And I was like, I would love to have this launched somewhere. So we ended up reaching out to Fangoria, um, who did a sort of like launch post about it. Um, and I think a lot of first time authors, or like new to the industry authors, might be more hesitant to take bigger shots like that. But it's like at the end of the day, shoot your shot. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, you know? So a lot of the marketing process was just like, I'm going to genuinely reach out to people who I think will engage with what it is that I've written, because I've read their work or I'm familiar with the platform, and I think that for, whatever reason, that it would be a good fit. Worst case scenario, they don't respond or they say no. Um, but between that and then the work that Titan was doing, I think it ended up being, a successful book launch. Like, I'm happy with it. Um, Although I'm waiting on the reports, I guess, back from them to see on what the sales were. It went into like 3 print runs, which is like more than I could ever possibly hope for. But because of how the like quarters work, I don't know how many we sold yet, really.
Yeah, well, certainly going into free print runs is a very good sign indeed, and I believe you were recently nominated for an award as well. So
Yeah,
it's looking good.
thank you. It's exciting. I've been sort of on the fringes of the horror industry for like many, many years. So the Stoker Award nomination was so exciting. I was like crying and jumping up and down for like an entire week after that. I'm still absolutely in awe. Um, I don't know. It's so exciting, to get recognition from your peers and the writers and the artists that you admire.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure that it will be the first of many on the basis of the quality of Coup de Grâce, but we are gonna get into that imminently. But before we do, I want to know about what some of the first stories and the first movies were that attracted you to the horror genre to begin with. So, I mean, what were you reading and watching from an early age?
Oh my goodness. Um, I was watching a lot more films than I was reading in the genre. I was like deeply interested in reading when I was a kid. It was always the Barnes and Noble equivalent in Canada is like Chapters and Indigo, and it was always like the place that I would want to go to for my birthday or whenever there was like a special occasion. So I was reading a lot of like YA literature and classics growing up, um, but not necessarily horror for some reason. Um, I was very, very into horror films. I used to have fright nights with friends where it was like we would go to Blockbuster and then we would rent like four horror movies and see if we could make it through them without, like watching through our fingers. Um, and I remember the like very first horror movie I think I watched was maybe Mars Attacks, which is like a horror comedy, but as a child, for some reason, the way that they were animated was horrifying to me, and I had nightmares for like years after that. It's just a like sort of uncanny valley appearance of them that really freaked me out. Um, and then I wasn't as drawn to slashers, which is like a big part of like the horror film genre. Um, I really loved haunted house films. Rose Red is like uh, technically a mini series that Stephen King had created, um, that I loved. It was like, a classic. Um, what else gave me nightmares? House on a Haunted Hill. Um, I loved anything with a sort of inconceivable space or haunted house stories, I think drew me the most. The Others, The Ring, stuff like that. All these things that I like saw at an age that I shouldn't have seen because um, I was the youngest of like four. I have three older brothers, and so they were always like going to the movies, and then anything that was like rated R or like 13 plus, they could go and see, and I wasn't allowed. And so I felt like I had to like prove myself. Um, and so the minute that like, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake came out on Blockbuster, I was like, I dragged my mom to um, the movie rental store, and then was trying to watch stuff like as soon as it came out where I could watch it in a sort of controlled environment. Um, but yeah, it was a medley of things, but definitely more the horror films that drew me. I don't know. I like haven't given it too much thought as to why, but it's definitely like um, I worked as a photographer in my like teens and early 20s, so I think that the visual medium was just something that was attractive to me. Um, and it was only more in my like mid 20s that I got to know horror literature and like more contemporary horror literature.
Yeah, you said before that you were working as a band photographer. Was that for kind of live shows? Was that for more promotional shots? Was it for the full gamut? And of course, I want to know about the type of bands, the type of genres and subgenres that you were working
Oh,
with and are into.
okay, so when I was 16, um, I was obsessed with My Chemical Romance because their Black Parade album had just come out, and I was like, "This aesthetic is phenomenal." I wanted to like bleach my hair like Gerard Way, and they were coming to Montreal, and I was on the like MCR live journal community, and then I saw someone who had posted these photos from one of the shows, and it was so crisp. I was like, how the hell are they getting those shots from the audience? And then I realized that concert photographer was a thing. And so I sent from my like school email account an email to the VP of Warner Brothers music division. And I'm so sorry to this man. I lied and said that I was the photographer for this like Canadian guitaring magazine, which like I wasn't. I was 16. And he like immediately approved a photo pass, which is like I don't know if they still do this, but each show is like a custom little patch, and then you have to go through this like media entrance, and then they take you behind the scenes. And it was at the Bell Center, which is like the biggest theater essentially in the city of Montreal. Um, and my like mom dropped me off, and I was like pretending that I knew what was going on. I had like borrowed a camera from a friend, um, and essentially the first three songs generally you're taken to the front of the pit, which is where the security guards are in front of the audience. And that's when they like will light the show really nicely so that they can get those good shots, and then they kick you out. And so I did this. Um, and then they were performing again with Linkin Park at this like outside festival in Toronto. And so I sent the guy an email again, and I was like, it's me again doing another exclusive for this Canadian guitaring magazine. And he approved again. And so I went to Toronto with my mom, did the same stint. It was like so exciting. You got to like stand in front of this audience of like 10,000 people. It's this like immense energy to be caught between that and like a performer. Um, and then with that, I had a portfolio that I applied to an actual magazine with. I ended up getting a job. And the next time that I emailed that guy, it was legitimate. And so sorry to this man. But I ended up doing that for work. It was like part-time work. So I would do maybe like a concert a week or a concert every 2 weeks. And it was everything from like independent bands to like big headliners. It was like Dave Matthews Band at the time, like No Doubt. It was like the bigger ones. And then I would shoot Osheaga is like a Montreal festival, or like Heavy Metal is like a Montreal festival where some smaller bands would come in. Um, and so I would shoot all of these, and then it's basically like next day turnaround. You have to have the images complete so that the magazine can publish them. Um, and yeah, I did that part time for maybe like 4 or 5 years. It was wonderful. Um, it's that like hubris that you can only have in your youth that like nowadays you would never get away with, the way that the internet works. Again, just like a beautiful crystallized time, like moment in history. And also just like being in my 30s, I'm like, I would never pull that kind of shit. At the age I am now, I had to be 16 to do that. But it was like a like delightful story that I have in my personal history.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me how I got into journalism. So I actually started with video game journalism, and
Awesome.
I set up my own website. I learned how to basically use Dreamweaver through a load of blogspot articles and things like that. So I
Hmm.
created this decent looking video game website, and then so I started emailing people like Capcom and EA and Konami just to be like, look, I got the website. Are you going to send me some games to review? And as soon as, one said yes, I could be like, well,
I got
Capcom
the
are on
creds.
board. So, you want to get in on this? And it was literally just through doing this that I learned the vocabulary. It's like, in
Hmm.
sometimes instead of just calling it a game, it's like you got any code. Code just means they're going to send you the video games. Have you got any code for Tomb Raider? Okay, great. Send it to this address. And yeah, it's just my home address, but I write the name of the website below. Oh, sounds a bit official. And then from that, I thought, well, hang on a minute. I can get paid a number of times here because not only can I put it on my website, I'm going to write to the local newspaper and be like, look, this is what I'm doing. If you want to pay me to have a little column, then we could do that. I think as well, maybe they had this is terrible, but I think they had a columnist at the time, but I didn't think he was any good. And he wasn't really being very specific. I'm like,
I
look, I can do a better
can do a
job.
job.
And they took me on. I was a 13-year-old boy. I don't know who I
13 is
replaced,
wild.
but yeah, that's kind of how it worked. And then from there, I got into like much later heavy metal journalism as well, because it's like if you're reviewing, you can kind of, as long as you've got the website or the magazine, you can get whatever you want. That's probably part of the reason I started This Is Horror. Wow, this is a good way to get horror books. And here I am still doing it, but not a 13-year-old boy as time moves forward. But
It's like a delicate balance between if you're good at something and you're passionate about it, why not get paid for it? But then the like double-edged sword of monetizing your hobbies, and then all of a sudden there is the obligation to do something which can have like alter or like tilt your experience of it. um I don't know if you like had that experience with this or if it's still.
I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's something that, I think about and I'm very active about with This Is Horror and with reading, and particularly for the podcast, because there could be, and I think for a number of people, there is a temptation to be like, right, let's just get the biggest guest that we can and let's expand our audience in that way. But, I've reached a point with This Is Horror and with This Is Horror podcast, because goodness, how long have I been doing it? Like 12 years now, for goodness sake, where I just decided I'm only going to talk to people if I really, really like their book. It's not
Mhm.
even good enough that, like, oh, I kind of enjoyed it. No, I want to have really fucking resonated and think this is an amazing book. And that is the main reason to get somebody on the show, because if not, number one, I'm not going to enjoy it as much. And number two, it just feels fake and cheap, and
Mhm.
it's not what I'm interested in doing. And so I mean, when publishers or authors send me a book, it's like, you can send me a book. I'll check it out, but if I don't enjoy it, then, well, it's not even if I don't enjoy it. If I don't absolutely love it, I'm probably not going to talk to the person. And
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that it's not a good book. It just means that it wasn't right for me at that particular point. And like
Right.
I've said to people before, there are different seasons of our life. There are different times when a book can connect with us. And sometimes I get the what could be the right book, but at the wrong time. But when you get the right book at the right time, it's a glorious, magical moment.
Mhm. Yeah. I think it also like I don't know, it's such a mix of there's definitely like a privilege to getting to say no. I'm thinking of in my jewelry experience or um even with um within the publishing industry with like agents for instance. Um you it does come from like a place of like a certain privilege to be able to say I this doesn't resonate with me or like you had said like at this time in my life or at this time in my career this isn't necessarily what I need. It wouldn't feel like authentic to pursue this path. um and at the same time I think it lends credibility to your work, um to know that you only engage with the things that you truly like speak to you on a certain level. um and I think that that goes for a lot of things because it's like it's such a saturated industry like any creative industry out there. Um, if you said yes to every blurb request, every like publisher request, every book that you got sent, then you get back into that like existential question of like, who am I doing this for? Am I doing it for the publisher? Am I doing it for me? Am I doing it for the author? Am I doing it for the reader? Which, like, at the end of the day, is the like target audience. So I think it's important not to like dilute that down and to have like conviction in your taste and in your opinions. But again, I know that that's not like that comes from a place of like, oh, you could like me, for instance, like I can speak comfortably on with jewelry. Like if I get certain bespoke requests, so it's like customizations where people will ask for something, and I'm like, I don't want to do that, so I say no. But at the start of my career, I was like saying yes to everything because I was like, I need to put food in my mouth. I have to say yes. Um, and then it'll be like things for my portfolio. And so you start from that place and then you get to where you are now. So, you know, it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, authenticity and just being honest has been something that's always been important to me. And I remember there was one magazine I was working for, and they sent me a book to review. I This was not a good book. Normally, I say, "Oh, it wasn't for me." I kind of feel objectively this was not a well-written book. Um, at that time, I would write any review, irrespective of what I feel. Whereas now, if someone asks me to review a book and I absolutely hate it, I'm probably just going to pass, because I think as well, because now I'm a writer, it's like I don't need to put that negative energy. I don't need to
Yeah.
shit all over this. It just feels unnecessarily cruel.
Hmm.
At the time, however, I gave a very honest appraisal, and the magazine said we can't publish this. But they said because this person has bought advertising. Whoa, no, 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 we can't give them a good review because they paid you.
Yeah.
I said this is the review. It's like I can't compromise. It's like either you publish this or you don't. But this is what I feel. I'm not gonna pretend that it's any good. I think then I doubled down and started sending extracts from the book to prove how bloody bad it was. But anyway, after that, I didn't really write for them much again. But I just didn't feel comfortable. And this is a magazine that exists to this day and is fairly big. But I can't engage in that. It's like, and I always say to people, if they want to advertise on This Is Horror, it's like, you can, but it doesn't mean you're going to get on the podcast. It doesn't mean you're going to get a review.
Hmm.
um but also it works the other way. It's like, if I ask you if you're going to advertise and you say no, it doesn't mean like, right now you're banned from the podcast. So, like, they're very much separate things, and I think they absolutely should be. I hate this practice of, like, trading money from the author or the publisher for a review. It just does not sit with me at all. I don't think it's right. I can't engage in that.
Yeah. I feel similarly. It's like um, honesty and justice are such a huge part of my value system, um, that I'm like, I won't engage with that type of thing. Um, I even have like my partner. I know this, like, people who are listening can't necessarily see this, but for Christmas last year, he made me a little zine, and it was like a way for me to rate all of the books that I had read that year. And I was like, this is just for me. I can be 100% honest in here. If I absolutely hated a book or didn't finish it, um, no one's going to see this. This is like just purely for me so I can, tear something to shreds if I didn't personally resonate with it. Um, and I think that, that's fine to do in like the privacy of this little book. I wouldn't do that on like a public forum where, again, like you had said, I'm an author. Like, I don't see the value in like tearing another person's work down because I didn't personally resonate with it. There was like a trend that I saw going around online recently where it was like books that I'd be forced to read in hell over and over again. And that put a sort of sour taste in my mouth. Where like, I like honesty and like the full breadth of reviews where not everything speaks to everyone. I wrote a book that very much has like a very divisive response. People either love it or they hate it, which is like fine for me. I love to not have a mid book and at least get some sort of emotional reaction out of someone. Um, I'm not like responsible for people's reactions to the book. I wrote what I wanted to write. Um, but I think just judging something on like a tropey sort of basis of like, here's a list of books that I fucking hate. And I don't know, it like gains online traction where we want sort of like catchy clickbaity things to engage with. But for me, that felt like it, struck a nerve. Because at the same time, the industry is very small. And I feel as though likely people who are posting those sorts of things are going to have those posts seen by potentially the authors that are listed on there. I don't know. To each their own.
Yeah, I think, probably growing up, there were a lot of, I guess, like provocative reviews and kind of holier than thou. And so maybe my earlier career was influenced by that. But
Hmm.
yeah, as I got possibly wiser, as I certainly got older, I just thought, yeah, it isn't for me. And I think as well, once you're in that industry, as you say, it's like, well, now these are your colleagues, and also you have a
Hmm.
personal reference point. Like, how would that feel if that was your book?
Yeah.
you know? Um, I want to know in terms of your writing. So, when was the first time that you wrote a story, and when was the moment that you realized this is for you? This is the path that you want to take?
Um, I was writing a lot of short fiction and doing a lot of online role playing in my early teens. So when I was like 11 to 15, 16, um, whenever I'd have sort of free assignment in class where you could turn in whatever creative thing you possibly could, a lot of the time it was either graphic design or writing or like some combination of the two. Um, and then when I was maybe 25, which would have been like 2015, around the time that I started my jewelry business. Um, I had these characters in my mind that whenever I would go to lie down, I would have like really bad insomnia at night ever since I was a kid. And um, my family members, they would like lie down and like immediately like put to sleep. And then for me, it would be just awake for like an hour and a half, sometimes longer. I'd have to keep myself entertained somehow. And so I was just telling myself these stories. And so the next night I would pick back up and then either it was almost like a choose your own adventure, which is kind of funny. I would like go back a couple scenes in my mind and then say, well, what if the characters did this? What would happen? And like play it out like a movie, which is funny now that I'm saying it out loud. I read recently Kaveh Akbar's book Martyr, and the main character throughout the book also has insomnia, and whenever he goes to sleep, will take either real or fictional characters. So, like his deceased mother and Lisa Simpson, and put them in conversation with each other, and then see what happens out of that. And so I was doing something like that, but with the same original characters that I had created. And then basically, finally, when I was 25, I was like, what the fuck? Why don't I write one of these down? Because it was really starting to take form. And so that's when I sort of officially started to write a project, wrote it to its completion, put it on the back burner. It was the first time that I had interacted with someone in the industry externally. Um, there was an editor. Her name was Jess Landry, a phenomenal writer, a phenomenal editor. Um, I had seen that she had edited Gwendolyn Keist's The Rust Maidens, and I loved that book at the time. And so I reached out to Jess, and I hired her to edit my manuscript. And she did. And then I was like, as with a lot of creative ventures, especially when you're younger, time passes, you end up making more work and engaging more with, reading. At the time, I went back to read her notes, and I was like, this book is awful. um, I was like, this needs so much work. And so I put that on the back burner. And then I started writing short stories. And I was like, fuck it, I'm going to submit. uh, since I was working as a jeweler at that time, also, I tried to make it a point where I was like, I'm only going to submit my work to charity anthologies or to pro paying anthologies. Because I had you have to have personal goals. One of my personal goals was like, I want to be an active member of the HWA. Um, and My first short story that I wrote ended up being published by Max Booth, who runs Ghoulish Books, who is the editor of Bury Your Gaze, which is an anthology that I edited. And so everything sort of neatly trickled into itself, where these relationships that I created, like right from the get go, were really, really strong ones with people who I loved working with. I loved their work. I loved their sort of life values, their goals aligned with mine. Um, and yeah, that's sort of the long and winding story of how I got started.
So with Bury Your Gaze, did you pitch it to Max or did they suggest it to you? How did that one come about?
So, Bury Your Gaze came about when, again, this is like so much of what we're talking about tonight is these crystallization of moments that don't feel possible now anymore. With the way that we started our, like, with your journalism and with the concert
Mm.
photography and with my jewelry. Um, there was like a post going around on Twitter, and it was like, if I could edit any anthology, it would be this. And so people were writing, um, you know, listing out whatever. And then I think I listed out two or three. It was like a tarot themed anthology, a liminal space anthology, and a anthology called Bury Your Gaze, which is like just tragic queer horror. And then I ended up getting a DM from Max, and they were like, "Do you want to do this?" And I was like, "I'm so down." It was my first editing gig in terms of like selecting people's work and then going through developmental edits, which was a really interesting process. We ended up having like a separate email account, and then we like opened submissions, and we sent out, like, I guess we like solicited some submissions, but then the solicited ones, there was like no guarantee that it would make it into the anthology, which in and of itself was an interesting process because going back to the like, for instance, writing negative reviews, there's these authors whose work you love, and then maybe what they've written doesn't necessarily align with the project, or, for one reason or another, doesn't work in the like entire coherence of what you're trying to do. And so you have to like very gently um, perfect the art of rejection. Um, But it was an interesting process. I want to say there was like over 600 submissions. And so I was like every night going through and like reading and slotting things into folders where it was like, Sophia, yes. Sophia, not sure. Max needs to look over this. Maybe yes, but it doesn't fit the anthology theme. There were some great stories that just didn't fit the theme. So like I couldn't justify putting them in the anthology. But the process was really interesting. And then there's some authors where um, when I was editing, it's like there's a word or two that I want changed, and otherwise it's perfect. I'm thinking of like Joe Kosh's work. I'm like, God could not touch this. It is perfect as it is. And then some authors where I was really lucky. They were like very receptive to more developmental changes. Um, and so it was an interesting process getting to sort of run the gamut and like see the full spectrum of what it's like to be an editor and understand from that side of things the full breadth of the experience of like sifting through submissions and then sending rejections out. And it gave me a more appreciation, you know, from an author's perspective of what that's like.
Do you think you'd like to edit an anthology again, or do you think at this phase in your life where you're with Titan, the metalsmithing is really blooming? I don't even know if there's capacity for it.
I love the process of editing. I think I would definitely do it again if it was like the right time and then the right project. Um, I'm lucky enough to get to pick the sort of passion projects that I want to do. Sometimes I say no to things only because like the timing isn't good with running a studio or having a day job and like all of these other things. Um, but it's one of those things I'm like, I've never given birth to a child, but I feel like it's a similar experience where at the time I'm like, why did I do this? What are you doing? This is so much work. This is so intense. I'm never doing this again. And then it's done. And there's like some amnesia that happens. And all of a sudden you're like, what if I edited another anthology? So I'm back at that point now.
So what I'm hearing is Daniel Carpenter or Max Booth or someone else listening, if you want a liminal spaces anthology, Sophia is the person to go to.
Hell yeah. I know there's like some other folks, I'm thinking specifically of like Gabino Iglesias, who had voiced some interest in like editing a liminal space anthology. And I'm like, if it's not me that's doing it, I would love to just see it exist because I love that as an aesthetic. And I really think that there's a sort of gap in the market for it
Mm.
where we have a lot of liminal space media visually, but not necessarily in writing. So I'd be interested in seeing different writers' perspectives on like what does that mean to them.
Yeah, I mean, immediately I think of Todd Kiesling. Of course, I
Yes.
think of Mark Daniel Lusky. Obviously, I do. And even John Paget, I could imagine doing something in liminal spaces. But yeah, there's so many authors, and even some who they might not necessarily write about it so much. It's like, what would a Nadia Bolkin liminal
Right.
spaces story look like? Or I was going to say, what would a Gemma Files? I feel Gemma Files is very much in the liminal space universe, the liminal space
Mm-hmm.
genre, but it's so ripe for stories, and it would be ripe for such a variety of stories. So yeah, if there's a publisher listening that would like to make that happen, then I think it's a case of it will happen. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's just a matter of when, but it's got to happen. I mean, goodness, you look at Silent Hill and how it's one of the most popular horror games of all time, and that is liminal as fuck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like it's especially having a sort of resurgence. And I'm gonna like backtrack what I said earlier, where there wasn't very much liminal space in genre writing. I think that there is, but it's maybe more online. A lot of like more indie spaces like Reddit. So it would be nice to see that in more like traditional published media, like all together in one space.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And I think the liminal spaces art that we see, it's more on the fringes. Like you say,
Mhm.
it's not quite at the forefront with, it is not at the front of the Barnes and Noble shop, or probably not even in the shop at all, unfortunately, but
Mhm.
it's
I
coming.
think, yeah, I think that there's going to be a sort of shift in that. I'm thinking of like, it's Friday when we're recording this. You know what else comes out on Friday? Severance episodes. Um, and that's having like a moment right now. And so I feel between that and A24 announced a Backrooms movie. Um, it's coming. It's like moving from the video game sphere into the film sphere, and eventually it'll hit the publishing sphere.
Yeah, it does tend to be that books is the last place where these things kind of catch on, but at least we're going in that direction.
Hmm.
And I mean, of course, talking about books, back with Bury Your Gaze, you said sometimes you would get a story that was great, but it didn't quite fit the theme. So, I mean, I'm wondering in terms of, themed tragic queer horror, what I suppose were some of the things where it's like, right, that isn't quite in the vision, what made it in the vision? What is tragic queer horror to you?
Specifically, when I had originally written the open call, I was looking for um, tragic queer romance. So it had to have like queer characters that, for whatever reason, didn't like could not necessarily end up together at the end of the story, which is like bury your gaze as a trope. Typically, is when there's two characters. The moment they come out as queer or have a kiss or like have sex for the first time, one of them dies. So it's like, as queer characters, they can never have happiness. Um, and so there was a sort of a backlash to that was happening. And um, as someone who is both queer and a horror author, I was like, I think what makes horror such an interesting genre is the tension and the chaos and the things that go wrong. Um, that's what makes something a drama rather than a comedy. Um, and so, what if we looked at that angle, but from the perspective of queer authors? So, anyone who is like queer identifying, no matter what that meant, if you were questioning and under that umbrella, that meant that you were eligible to submit. Um, and so it originally started off like that. And then as I was accepting submissions, it opened itself up a little bit more to the aspect of not necessarily romantic love, but like community love and familial love. There were some stories that I accepted that were, um, when I ended up putting together the anthology, I had to order things. Which was like an interesting process to do. One of my close friends is a musician, and she outsources to a friend of hers, um, putting in order the track list because she's like, I'm too close to the project. I don't know what order these should be in. So she always outsources that to a friend of hers. And I was like, oh, now I sort of understand for the first time, as an anthology editor, you have to do essentially the same thing. So I was like, I have to find some sort of narrative thread that is weaving all these things together. And what it ended up being was, from like the sole one person alone, um, queer and trying to reach out to their community or like themselves and not being able to achieve that, to like couples and to the many where it isn't successful, and then at the very last story it might be successful, um, where there's like almost an element of hope. And so that's what it ended up being at the end. So it was a little bit different than my initial call, but I'm thinking of like, I don't know if I'm like allowed to say this on air because I don't think that it's been published, but like I'll give a general gist. Um, Bitter Corella wrote this phenomenal story about transvestigation where it was like this woman who's obsessed with transvestigating her husband and then her daughter and just like questioning the gender of everyone around her until it became this like psychotic obsession by the end of the story. And it was phenomenal. And I think about it so much, especially now with just like the state of the world. Um, but it didn't fit the call, so I had to say no. But I think about that story every day.
Good. I'm so interested in just that kind of little pitch for Bitter Corella's story, and now I want to see it in the world. I hope that it is published somewhere because, wow, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, a lot of the time it's like crossing my fingers and hoping that it finds a home somewhere else. Whenever I find open calls that fit a story that we said no to, I'll send it to the author and be like, if this is still looking for a home, this feels like a good place for it. Because even of some of the ones that we had to say no to, there's still like a handful of them that I'll think about from time to time, um, which like stands for something. It means that the stories were impactful in some way.
So let's talk about Coup de Grâce, and I want to know to begin with, what is the elevator pitch for this for our listeners who are unfamiliar?
Oh my. Um, Coup de Grâce is about a man in Montreal who wants to take his own life. And he is taking the underground subway to the end of the line where he plans to walk east until he hits the St. Lawrence River in Montreal and then drown. Um, and he falls asleep on the subway. And when he wakes up, he's in a station that doesn't exist and it has no exits and he cannot go back. And so the book is about his experience being trapped in this liminal space that he cannot get out of, that has no windows, no exits. Um, and yeah, any more than that would be spoiler territory.
And what was your why for writing this book?
Ooh, it was a mix of things. It was a mix of circumstances. I was initially asked to write a novella for Crystal Lake Publishing. Um, they have a series called Dark Tide. And earlier on the episode, we had talked about Jess Landry, who is the first person to read my work. And she had reached out to me. She said, hey, we're doing this anthology series essentially, and her and Nadia Bulkin were looking for a third person to complete this anthology series. I loved both of their work, and so I said, of course, I'll be part of this project. And so I had initially written this book as part of that. It started off with very different roots, where instead of being a singular story about this man who wants to take his own life, it was about a cast of people who were all dealing with liminalities in different ways. And so there was a subway car that appeared at the end of the line out of nowhere, and nobody knew where the tunnel went. And so they were sending an expedition team in. So um, it was a little bit more along the like traditional lines of uh, almost like found footage, and I found that it was a lot to fit into a novella length project because you have to tie the loose ends on all of these like cast of characters. Um, and then B, when I ended up narrowing it down to this one character, long story short, I had the editor for the project look it over. The way that it was written didn't resonate with him personally, because I will be the first to admit, as the author of this work, that it is very verbose, and it is very dense in certain parts, and that is by design. I love when form sort of follows function. That was something that I was taught in graphic design, where something can be effective and beautiful, and it could also, you can step back and almost see like the meta framework of what it is that you're looking at. I love like a when a film can only be a film, or you look at, House of Leaves is a perfect example. There is no audiobook of House of Leaves. It can only be in the form that it is. And long story short, the project didn't resonate with that editor. And I ended up writing a different project that felt more in line with that anthology series. Um, Held on to the book, um, and then I can go into more specifics. But now it is published with Titan, and it's the beautiful way in which sometimes there are silver linings to things that you don't see at the time.
Right. And how did you end up working with Titan? So let's get into those specifics.
Okay, so um, I had this entire book that was written because it had to get all the way to the like editorial stage, and I started sending it out again back to my like Excel sheet nonsense. I had this Excel sheet that was like my top 5 publishers that I want to work with, and then I was very much reaching out to like independent publishers. Um, that like whose catalogs I really liked, who I wanted to work with. Um, I was unagented, so it's almost one of those pipe dream things where it's like unless you have an agent, there is no way to approach traditional publishing. Um, One has to precede the other. Um, there was this is the second time where I'm like bringing up Twitter as this like weird fortuitous thing, which is again why I'm sad that this like framework doesn't exist anymore in the same way. Um, I think someone had tweeted like, uh, describe your current work in progress as just like vibes. And then I think I had like described it as like these infinite escalators and these enormous underground cathedrals. And it was just like, because so much of liminal space relies heavily on space itself as like having a mind of its own and being a threat that's not natural or tangible, but as the existence of a space itself. I was like, oh, this is like the perfect tweet opportunity. And then um, the acquiring editor at Titan ended up seeing the tweet and he sent me a message and he said, pitch this to me. And I had never pitched. I think maybe one other publisher had been like, pitch this to me. And then we'll see if I want like a full length manuscript. Um, he liked the general pitch. I sent him the full manuscript. Um, and then a couple months later, I ended up getting the response of like, we'd like to send this to acquisition. Is it still available? Which is just, like dream come true. So exciting as an author, especially for a work like this, which is like so deeply experimental for a publisher of that size to sort of take a risk on a project like that meant a lot to me, like specifically as an author or like as a creator. um, Very like affirming that sometimes you can do things that are a little bit outlandish and a little bit like outside of genre tropes. And if it's effective or it feels like it lands with the right audience, very much this has like a specific audience. People love it or they hate it, which is like having some distance between the release date, which was back in October and we're in March now. you know, I peek at Goodreads sometimes. It's interesting to see what people's reactions to it are. Um, but it's really nice to have like an editor who absolutely stood behind the project and loved it for all of the like purpleness of its prose, which is like more than I could ever possibly ask for as a like creative trying to make a career.
Yeah, to me as well. I mean, I feel that a lot of the criticisms, because I had a little look at Goodreads too, seem to almost be features, or perhaps in a bizarre way, might even be a compliment. If people are saying, at times it was really dense and it was kind of almost overwhelming, it's like, well, yeah, that's the metaphor for depression. You felt what you were kind of meant to feel through reading this book. You were really immersed in it. So, I mean, do you have a strange relationship with these so called negative reviews? Because they're kind of complimenting your style at the same time, even if it wasn't their intention.
I think they're interesting. I always love, like, either with, like, literature or I guess more frequently since movies are so much easier to sort of take in. I love going on Letterbox, sort reviews by, like, between half a star and 1 star and just see what people are writing, even about something that I love. I'm like, "Change my mind." Or something that I hate, I'm like, "I want validation that I'm not the only one who thinks this." And so, like, of course, it's gonna be for any media, including my own work. Um, and yeah, it's interesting. The ones that sort of like make me smile are the ones that were like, this book does something at the end that made me feel like deeply uncomfortable. Um, and like for that reason, I don't ever like I hate this book. And it's like so interesting to see the like visceral reaction that people have where um I'm like, as an artist, and this is something that I've had to learn over time. Like this is the first time that I publish something that's like read by more than, a handful of like my close friends. Um, so once something goes out into the world, it's like it's no longer yours. You only can take responsibility for creating the thing that you had intended to create at the like at the end of the day. And so I can see the ways in which having distance from its release date that I might have changed things now, which means that I've like grown as an artist, which is really nice. Um, but overall, I'm like proud of it, and I think that for me, I would prefer to have some like created a work of art that has a strong reaction, even if it's not the reaction that I was hoping for. Than people being like, "It's all right, it's good. Sophia's nice." I'm like, okay, I don't want like I could talk about this ad nauseum. Um, one of the things where I'm like, oh man, at the time of releasing it, it was my first book. I had like nothing to write on my author bio. So like the publisher was like, we need an author biography. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I was looking through all these like other books that I have, and the author bios are like, so and so has been nominated for like this such and such award and like has been a professor, blah blah blah. And then I was like, what, like I have lived a whole life, but none of it feels relevant experience. And so I was like, okay, I gave lectures at like what used to be Miskatonic Institute in Montreal. They like renamed it Montreal. I was like, okay, put that in there. And then I was like, I'm the mod for the horror and horror lit subreddits. Um, I love those forums. There's like so much interesting conversation that happens there. Um, and so I put that in the author bio as well. And then there were so many like reviews that were popping up that were like low star rating. And they were like, oh, we can tell that Sophia is a horror moderator because it just has that air of like a creepy pasta ness to it. And I was like, okay, that like you can read that in a couple different ways, like slung as an insult or like I think creepy pastas can be good. Um, but it was just interesting to see the ways in which people would take external things and like apply them to fiction. This is like the last thing that I'll say. There was one review that I had read, and it was like, this is clearly a projection of Sophia's life onto the character. And so this is a work, like an autobiographical work, and it should have been a series of essays. And I don't know. that was also so interesting to me to see. I don't know, to like read all these different experiences where I was like, that wasn't my intention. Of course, as an author, you're going to have some amount of self that you're putting into moments or characters. You're pulling from real life experiences, you're pulling from feelings, even if they're not exact experiences, you can approximate in your mind. And the whole point of an author is to imagine what it would feel like to be in those experiences. And like, I have gone through depression in my life. That was what drew me to the project in a lot of ways. Um, but it was interesting to see people sort of projecting me onto these characters. Um, so yeah, there's a nice variety of reviews out there, and they're all. It's always very interesting to read them, even the ones that are like thumbs down, this is bad. I want to like whip my ass with it. I'm like, okay, like thank you for your feedback.
Yeah, I hate it when people say what they think the story or the movie or the book or whatever should have been. It's like, well, no. That might be what you would have done with it, but this is the author's work. It was what it needed to be, what the author intended it to be. So the fact that you didn't like it or you didn't resonate with it is a separate conversation, but it is so arrogant to say this should have been a series of essays. And the most bizarre review I ever received in that genre of what a book should have been was when one was reviewing my novella, The Girl in the Video, and they basically were describing all the things they thought it should have had, and they were essentially The Ring. And it's like, well,
You're like, that
it,
exists.
I think they might have even written, why wasn't it more like The Ring? Well, because you can read the fucking Ring by Koji Suzuki. That's why, because yeah, as you say, it already exists. So it's it's bizarre, and of course, this is why we should never strive to please everyone, because you'll have some people, no matter what you do, some people will want it to be more original in inverted commas, and then others will want it to be more like an archetype or an existing property, in my case,
Mhm.
like The Ring. So you might as well do, going back to the first hour, what is authentically you and what you wanted to do, because God, it's a trap if you try to write something to universally please others, and it's impossible. You could never do that anyway, so you might as well not even attempt to.
Yeah, there's like the quote that I always think of. I think it was Dita Von Teese that said, "You could be the tastiest peach in the world, but there's still people that aren't gonna like peaches." And I'm like, yeah. At the end of the day, you have to think about, again, going back to like the existential question of why am I doing this? Who am I doing this for? And there are some people where it's like, if your goal is to write commercial fiction and reach a lot of people and have a sort of wide audience in like a specific genre, then that should be their aim, and then they'll write work with that goal in mind. But for me, usually when I'm approaching work, I'm writing it for myself first and foremost, because if I'm not holding my own attention, there's no way that I'm going to be able to even finish the project. So it has to start with that. It has to start with nuggets of what are these different things that interest me and how can I combine them together, um, in a way that's not regurgitating something that's already been done.
Yeah, and I think what we have here as well, it's a very original, it's at times very provocative, it is thought provoking. And it's also almost impossible to categorize. If somebody asked me, what is the book about or what genre is it in? I mean, it's broadly in the horror genre. You can say that there's something a little bit Clive Barker at times about it, particularly just this hidden subway, these hidden spaces, and this liminality. of course, I mentioned Silent Hill before. Of course, because of particularly compositionally, there's House of Leaves. I think there's also something a bit Jacob's Ladder about it, and it it is
Yes.
almost like, what is this book? It's like it's depression in literary form. I don't know kind of how else to even describe it. And I mean, when you were writing it as well, did you have concerns that it's like, yeah, in terms of the like even pitching it, but maybe that wasn't in your mind at the time because you'd originally had the Crystal Lake deal, and then kind of Daniel had approached you, but it it's a difficult one to kind of succinctly summarize if someone asks you what's it about. It's like, well, just read the entire book and then you'll have your answer.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one to categorize. And um, when I started writing it, uh, I was working on a lot of different projects at the same time. I had a writing partner at the time where we would just like get together and shoot the shit at night and write little scenes for one another, which is really cool. It was like you're writing for an audience of one, and you already like each other's work, so it's always going to be a banger. Um, and so the stakes were really low. And one of the things that I'm discovering now that I have a published work behind me is really keeping that core at the heart of everything that I do from here on forward, where I'm like, I can't and do not want to be reproducing that same work over and over again. And I have to stay true to whatever originally interested me about whatever projects I'm currently working on or will be working on without thinking like, this is what's popular or this is what worked about my last thing and this is what people are going to expect. Um, Once that sort of corrupts your mind, it's really hard to shed it. I don't know. So that's like something that's new to me.
I wonder too, and alluded, I think we alluded towards this, at the end of the book, it's maybe a compositional spoiler, but I don't think it's a plot spoiler to say that it literally at the very, very end turns into a choose your own adventure. I'll say
Mhm.
that about it. And the kind of thing about that is it then makes you as the reader complicit, which makes it more terrifying. Like you are now an active participant in this story. When did you know that this was going to be an element to the book? And how was this received by your editor, Daniel Carpenter?
Um, I knew that it was going to be choose your own adventure before it was sent to Daniel because it had already sort of had a complete draft at that point. Um, but essentially, originally it was a more traditional narrative, although a little bit more philosophical, if you can like believe that. Um, when it had the larger cast, um, because I was touching on the liminality of so many different elements of people's character background. So it was like one character was going through a gender transition, and one of them had just come back from war, and then one of them had like a sickness of the body, and one of them had a sickness of the mind. And so, when you're touching on so many things, in order to tie all those threads together in a novella length, you have to almost paint with really broad strokes, which means the language was getting really philosophical to the point where, like, I myself was like, good God, like, is anyone going to want to read this? I'm like rereading my own stuff and I'm like thinking it's pretentious, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But at the time, I was feeling almost like insecure about it. And then I went to go lie down. And I just started thinking of like one of the characters who ended up being the main character of the story, Vicken, talking to me as the author. Um, and then I opened up my notes and I just ended up writing a scene of like, what if he talked to me directly? And all of a sudden, this project that I was like, honestly, like 85% done, I was like, oh, I have this new excitement for it in a way that completely eclipses the feelings that I have had of it before. And I was like, okay, open up a new file. What if we change this completely? Just immediately started writing these like random, like quote unquote, choose your own adventure scenes where there's like a metafictional element where you're forced to interact with a character and the character in some way knows that you're there. I've always loved metafiction when it like shows up in films, when it shows up in books. I was like, oh my gosh, like, of course, this is like perfect. And then in that weird and wonderful way that art can sometimes be, it's like all of these puzzle pieces slotted together perfectly in a way that I hadn't necessarily anticipated. Um, where the like whole trajectory of the book all of a sudden made sense all the way back to like the start where I was like, oh my God, there's all these like to whatever talk technical, all these like plans and payoffs that made sense that I hadn't even necessarily thought of when I was initially writing it. Um, which was really cool.
And you said during the kind of read through that there were, I suppose, moments of doubt as you were looking at some of the things that you'd written, and you said that you felt some moments were pretentious. Now that it's out in the world, and as we said before, I guess we've had about 6 months or so between it being published. Obviously, you've had a lot of really positive acclaim. You've had the award nomination. You've had really respected people within the genre say this is a fucking great book. Has this helped with your confidence and your identity as a writer to just boldly put out whatever it is that you want to put out? Because obviously it's resonating with, a not inconsiderable amount of people.
It definitely helps. It's like when you're writing something, of course, you're spending so much time alone with it. You've like created this entire world that you've been living in for months, sometimes years. And then all of a sudden it's out of your mind, it's out of your hands. You aren't really, I don't want to say responsible, but you don't really have control over how people are going to receive it. And to have other artists whose work I immensely respect have true, like honest, valuable feedback on it that's like positive is like more than I could ever possibly ask for. And um of course it's like whatever, for every one nice thing that someone says, it feels like 10 bullets of like when one person says something negative. Um but the more amount of time that passes, the more I think like I accomplish what I set out to write. And that's at the end of the day more than I could ever possibly ask for. Like if I had never published this and I had just written it and it sat in a drawer, I would still be proud of it. Um, which at the end of the day is how I want to continue to approach future work. Um, nothing is ever sort of guaranteed, especially in this industry. Things move at like such a quick pace. You don't know like if people's taste is going to resonate with what it is that you're writing. Sometimes one story is a banger and another one is like an absolute flop. Um, so you can only ever really make things for yourself. Otherwise, you won't necessarily feel fulfilled ever.
Yeah, this is why I often say if you can find joy or you can find fulfillment in the act of writing itself, then you win every time. So I think it's important to try and find joy as much as we can in what is a solitary and often isolating experience.
Mhm. I definitely think so. Um, and that can look like a lot of things to different people. When we were talking about like pretensions earlier, I was thinking about um, Ethan Hawke did like an interview, I think, with Time magazine where he was talking about pretentiousness and it just meaning that as an artist, you have to set a goal for yourself. And so might as well have those goals be lofty. And you can approach that from the perspective of pretension or from the perspective of like experimentalism or anything that's like out of the norm for a genre or for an industry. Um, and I think of that often when I'm like approaching the things that I'm currently working on, where I might as well push the envelope of whatever it is that I'm trying to do. You can always reel it back. Um, but I find that it's hard to sort of push things further when you've already established them.
Now, there are a number of references to other things, kind of little Easter eggs hidden within the text. And one that particularly stood out is the Japanese filmmaker Kurosawa, specifically to his film Pulse.
Mhm.
So I want to know a little bit about your decision to include that within Coup de Grâce, and also I want to know about your relationship with East Asian cinema and East Asian studies because we spoke a little bit about that offline. So let's bring it online and let the people know.
Yeah. Um, I have like a deep love of that film. And I don't know, I'm a personal believer in if something resonates with you, to sort of pepper it in wherever you want. So it felt like the scene that references that, which is like the elevator game scene, where the character is thinking back on the scene from Pulse, where um, on the computer screens, once you load a website, it says, "Would you like to meet a ghost?" Um, and so that element felt so striking, and I was like, "I'm gonna put it in because I can." So it's, I guess, like an interesting background for it, but uh, when I was a teen, and I was initially getting into horror, as a lot of people do, once you start to get into the genre, you start to push the envelope with yourself almost to see what is the spookiest thing that I could find? What is the uh, most like intense, harrowing, disturbing, disgusting film that I could find? And of course, there's like the top 10 lists that always pop up. And J horror and like specific, like in particular, was on so many of these lists of like deeply dreadful fear that almost is like difficult and like nebulous to identify. And so I was going on like torrenting websites and downloading all of these movies. And so I feel as though they had a really deep influence on my aesthetic as an artist. Um, One of the things that I've like sort of learned recently is there's so much of what happens to you in your childhood and in your early teens that sort of locks in your aesthetic or your voice as a creator. And it's not to say that like as an adult that you can't add to that lexicon. Um, but there's always references that your creative mind will go back to. And so like Japanese horror is certainly one of them. Um, and then like completely unrelated to that, after I had graduated from graphic design, which is like college here, I applied to be in cinema school with no film in my portfolio. I only applied with graphic design, and so I got rejected. And I was like, "It's fine. I'll get a BA in something else." And then when I looked at the McGill book of like curriculum, I was like, oh my God, they don't do like sort of fine art at McGill. I wasn't sure what to study. Um, and I felt compelled to do like to complete academics or at least like complete a BA. And so I was like, okay, East Asian studies. The person I was dating at the time had lived in Japan. Um, I was like, I love Japanese literature. I love Japanese culture. And I wanted to learn more about like Korean history and Chinese history. And so I ended up studying that. And then, as with a lot of things in youth, it feels as though once you start something, that it's like a sunken cost theory where you're like, I've already put a year into this, I have to continue. And so I ended up getting a bachelor's in East Asian studies with like a major in Japanese language and culture. How much Japanese can I speak now? So little, because I'm not immersed in it. So I'm so ashamed. But it comes back when I visit, thankfully.
So how much Japanese could you speak kind of, I guess, at the height of of the studies? Because yeah, I suppose having not done a degree in it, I don't know what level do they take it to.
Yeah, so there was you could major in different elements. So there was like the historical element, the culture element, and then the language element. And you have to pick two sort of branches of it. And so I did the language and the culture element. And it was the first time in my life where I needed a tutor because language does not come easily to me at all, which is funny because like my mother's a translator. She can speak so many languages. It comes to her so easily. She has the memory for it. And me, it's just like brain fog. But at the height of it, essentially, like by the end of the 4 years, you are supposed to be able to be a translator. And then I only did a year of the like language module itself, which is like the basic to graduate. But I was like dreaming in Japanese, which was interesting. Like I remember right before the final exam, which is like you have to write this 10-page essay and you don't know what the subject is going to be until you get there. I was like, I had this dream about like being on Oprah and we were speaking in Japanese together. And I was like, oh, this is like the height of a language really permeating my mind.
Yeah, I've had it said before that once you start dreaming in the target language that you're learning, that's when you know that you've kind of leveled up. So I mean,
Mhm.
Oprah as well. I don't know. Do we want to
So weird.
unpack that? Is there anything to unpack? What a what a facet to the dream to include Oprah
So
talking
random.
in. Yeah, yeah. But goodness, I mean, that's an intense course in the 4 years for you to be expected to be at a level where you can be a translator. But that's a facet of the course. You're also learning about the culture. Goodness
Yeah,
me.
it was intense. I ended up going more with like the sort of culture branch and then double majoring in women's studies because like gender studies and social justice studies was interesting to me as well at the time. Um, but the culture module sort of opened my eyes up to so much Japanese literature that I never would have necessarily known about. Um, because beyond like Murakami at the time, there was like not that many authors that were permeating, I guess, like bookstores in the West. There's like others that I could think of. But there were courses that I was taking that were like anarchy in Japan, where we were reading books on like history and culture that had to do with that, um, which is really interesting to me. And I'm glad that I have these books like on my shelf now that I can still go back and reference that I might not necessarily have known about otherwise.
And so when you're watching Japanese cinema, do you typically have the English subtitles on, or I don't know at what level your Japanese has got, or what it was at the peak?
Yeah, I definitely need to have subtitles on now. It's um my mind is so slow to register the like translation in real time and then like the way that sentences are ordered, like this, is not like the same as in English. And so you're like waiting for the end of the sentence to be able to like translate it, and then by the time that that's done, it's like moving so quickly. Um, I'm just, I don't know. As a writer, I'm embarrassed to say I'm not like like language does not necessarily come very easily to me. When I started off the first year of the program, I was literally like recording myself saying vocabulary and then trying to replay it to myself at night for like hypnosis, which is like, that's not a thing that works, by the way. If anyone wants to try that, you're not going to retain any of that shit. Um, but I was like trying to easy out my way through it, which I very quickly learned was not going to work. But yeah, living in Montreal, I'm like, I have to know French. It's like the official language in Quebec. But that comes a lot more easily because I was like, I grew up in Quebec mostly. So your brain is spongy when you're a child. And so you learn language so much more easily. And then Japanese as an adult, I was like, oh, okay, like without being fully immersed, it's so difficult to practice. Um, but yeah, maybe I should watch the films without subtitles. I should read more. See, but what I ended up doing when I was like in my first year was just reading children's books because I was like, oh, okay, it has like the hiragana written on top. I was like, okay, this is accessible to me.
Yeah, but I mean, unfortunately, that's what we have to do when we're starting out. You want to just jump in with the
Hmm.
literature, but you're just not going to understand any of it. I mean, if it was the other way around and you're encountering English for the first time, obviously there's a lot of metaphor, and it, the literal reading is not often the actual meaning of the text. So,
Hmm.
yeah. But that
Or,
yeah, that hiragana and katakana really helps. It's like sometimes I wish that the kanji just didn't exist because reading would
there's a
be
lot of
such a
them.
breeze. But yeah, yeah, like 2,000 basic ones, but then about 10,000 in total in general.
Yeah,
And
it was um at the end of the like first year they were like you have to have learned 4,000. I was like, so I have this stack of flashcards that I keep just as like a memento that I'm like, you did this. You were capable of that. You're capable of a lot. um I'm like, one day I will go back and try to relearn them, but I don't know.
yeah,
It's a lot.
4,000 in 1 year. That's that is intense. That is ridiculous. And the difficulty as well is that there are quite a lot that looks so similar, and it's like, nope, there's one stroke different, and now it means
Yeah.
something completely different.
Yeah, exactly. So it was interesting. I'm like, I'm glad I did it and I learned a lot. Um, and it like taught me a certain discipline that I didn't know that I had in me. Because to do something that you're like not naturally good at, we like talked about this a little bit earlier in the episode where I like had started jewelry. Um, it's so hard to be like an adult beginning something. Um, where you're like, oh, I don't want to waste time. I just want to like get to the good part where you have to sort of do your due diligence and pay your dues and do the learning process. Um, but yeah,
And going back to Coup de Grâce, do you think that, in writing it, what was it, cathartic? Was it transformative? Did it even help you navigate the landscape of depression? Because there's so much that has been packed into it. I'm wondering how just the experience of writing changed you or affected you.
that's an interesting question. Um, I have definitely gone through, like, come in and out of depressive episodes throughout my life. And I think that one thing that comes from age and experience is having gone through experiences personally, you can look back on your life and be like, I made it through this. I can do it one more time. And so it was interesting putting that to literal experimentation where it's like if I put a character in a liminal state that feels like it's eternal, how much can I like push that character before it feels like it's too much and it like tips the scale where they're like, I don't want to do this anymore. Um, or like, oh, this is fine. I got through this the last time. You really have to sort of toe the line. And I think it was only through going through that experience multiple times in my life where I was able to be like, okay, I'm going to try and be level headed and patient about this and try to give that same level headedness and patience to my character. Um, and then it's at the reader's discretion if they want to push the envelope or not. And I think it says a lot about whoever it is that's reading it, what they ultimately choose in the choose your own adventure element, which is always really interesting. Whenever someone tells me that they've read the book, the first question that I always ask is like, what did you do at the end? Which says a lot about them, I think.
Yeah, I must admit that, for the sake of having this conversation, I then went back to look at, right, what are all the possible options,
Hell yeah.
to make sure that I'd read it thoroughly, which perhaps is not in the spirit, but it it felt like it gave a more complete reading
Mhm.
experience. And yeah, the fate can be pretty different depending upon the option that you choose, let's say.
Mhm. Yeah. There's some people that, and it's like more common than I thought would read through it completely straightforward. So it's like for a choose your own adventure, it has page flip elements, which was when I was when I had submitted that to Titan, it was really interesting because I was like, oh shit, I have this like Word document that if you load it on a different computer than mine, page 89 is now page 91 and the page flip instructions no longer make sense. So I had to learn how to like hyperlink within the document. Um, but there were some people that were just reading it straight through. They were like ignoring the page turn elements. And I was like, okay, that says something about them too, which is interesting. And then I have to make sure that this still makes logical sense if people completely ignore the instructions, um, which is, I don't know, fascinating to me. There's like another book I'm thinking of, In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, who's like a fantastic author, where she looks at an abusive relationship through the lens of a haunted house and all these different writing tropes. And so one of the writing tropes is a choose your own adventure. And the way that she had done it, there's like one point where I did like you, where I was like, I'm gonna full like read the full experience. You get to a page and it's like you couldn't have gotten to this page unless you flipped through and cheated. So that says something about you as a reader. And it's like talking to you directly. And I was like, oh my God, this is like it's rare to experience again like a metafictional element where it's sort of breaking the fourth wall, and saying once a work of art is completed, there is a like correct end to where things are going, whether or not you will that into existence, um, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it feels like you were almost being called out. It's like, right, we know that you've been cheating, so
Yeah,
gonna have a little word with you now.
exactly.
How did Titan respond to the choose your own adventure element? Were they receptive from the start? Was there any concern? Was there a logistical headache as to how it might work for other formats of the book?
Uh, it's been, I'm like really happy to say it's been really good thus far. I did have like a meeting with Daniel, my editor, where I basically had to, um, I guess, like defend the order in which the choose your own adventure elements happen. Because again, if someone reads it straight through, it has to make certain sense. And he had suggested some changes where I was like, no, I want to keep it the way that it is for this reason. And then he agreed. And so I'm really lucky in that we aligned really like easily from the get go on that. I just found out recently that there's going to be an audiobook version that's coming out in August, which I'm so excited about. I'm like, oh my God, somebody's going to be reading my work for like a full 2 hours, 3 hours. I don't know. Um, I have no idea how they're going to do that. Are they going to be like, click chapter 11 if like Felix does this? I don't know. I don't know how that works. I've never audiobook read a choose your own adventure story. I don't know how they know what to do.
Yeah, I was thinking about this before, and I noted that there wasn't an audiobook. I assumed it was because of the ending and the impracticalities. And then, as I often do, my brain starts to run away with, like, well, what would it look like if it was a choose your own adventure? And I was thinking, I don't even know if you can do this, but would you have to program something in so that when it got to the choose part, it pauses the audiobook? So you
That'd be great.
have to actively press a button. Because if not, then I imagine so many people would probably, particularly because sometimes you'll be listening to audiobooks when we're
Yeah,
on
just
the
like
go. They're like, oh, well, let's just let it play. But if the audiobook pauses, then it forces you. You have to click this option or that option. I don't know if that is practical. I don't know if it's possible because obviously,
yeah.
you're not just on one platform. You're going to be on Audible, you're going to be on audiobooks.com, you're going to be on Google Playbooks. I
Hmm.
don't need to list everything else, so this is going to turn into a weird conversation. And the normal way that you would upload an audiobook would be you just upload each individual chapter file. So
Hmm.
you
The way
need
that
to ask. You need to find out how they're going to do that.
I really should. Like the way that you mentioned it makes me think of when Netflix released Bandersnatch as part of like the Black Mirror series, and then I think how they did it was it sort of pauses, and then if you don't select, it randomly chooses a response for you, and I'm like that would work, but of course Netflix is in charge of its own UI. Um, I don't know how like Apple or Google is gonna approach this. So literally the only way that I can think of is like click chapter 12 if like the character does this. Um Otherwise, I don't know. It's gonna be as like new for me as it is to readers.
Yeah, they're probably going to have to go for the click chapter, blah, blah, blah option.
Mhm.
Because without that, they potentially have to create an entire new platform and interface. And I love your
um,
book, but I'm not sure if corporations like Google and
it's an
Amazon
investment.
are prepared to do that. But if you're gonna say like, okay, click chapter 22 for this, chapter
Mhm.
10 for this, or whatever, they also need to bake in some sort of, I don't know, 10 to 20-second pause at the end.
Pause.
I wash up a lot when I'm listening to a book, so I need
Same.
time, and I wear washing up gloves because I don't want these hands to get all hard and rough. So you got to give me time to take the gloves off to click to the next chapter. So
I will
that's what
report your
I'm
notes.
saying
Hack to
to
type.
Audible. Just give me 10 seconds. 'Cause those gloves can be on tight.
Mhm.
Yeah. Which maybe segues into your previous job as a dominatrix. I didn't even mean to go there, but as I
You're
said,
like, hey.
tight gloves, it's like there's a segue opportunity. I am a little bit interested in how you got into that line of work and how long you were a dominatrix for. Part-time dominatrix, you. you said, so not full-time, a little bit
I
on
guess
the side.
yeah, it's because I was like I was also working at Sephora at the time, which made for really interesting, bag checks, like, when you clock in and clock out at your shift, your bag has to get checked, and so sometimes I'd have some interesting, um, items in there, for my managers to discover, but basically, um, if I, like, draw it back to a precise moment, there was a, sex blogger that I used to follow. I think her name was Carly Scorciano, and she had a series on Vice that she was doing just about exploring sexuality around the world. And in one of her episodes, she met with a New York City dominatrix, and she was like, "This is wild and hysterical and delightful. You can get paid to uh, like corporally punish someone or humiliate someone or whatever." And I was like, oh my god, that's fascinating. um, and so as someone who is like a through purist at endeavors, sometimes I reached out to different doms in the city. One in particular, I was like, I liked her website in terms of she approached it from a really almost therapeutic angle, where it was about meeting like client specific needs, and it's not necessarily about you. It's about crystallizing a. Um, it's not always like a role play, but like a fantasy. And I was like, "Can I tutor under you essentially?" And she agreed, and then I met with her. She let me like spectate a session, and it was really cute. I still have it. She had this like little book that she had given me, and then she was like, "Here are all the essentials of like pro doming," and each page had like a different element. It was like ball busting, like cock and ball torture, humiliation. It was like all these different elements, and so she was like writing little notes for me. um, and so I did like duo sessions with her. She was like, anything that you're doing on something else, I want you to know what it feels like on you first. And so I got like tased with a cattle prod to make sure that if I like ever did that to someone, I would know exactly what it felt like. Um, and then I ended up doing that for like 4 or 5 years. It was like on and off. I loved it as an experience. It was really fun. It was really delightful. Um, it was cool to get almost like a prompt at the start of every session where it was like sometimes people had like, you know, more common like fetishes, we'll say, and then sometimes they were more niche and specific. And I'd have really interesting conversations with people that I otherwise wouldn't have talked to or wouldn't have had those conversations with where um like the person that I like that mentored me, because it is such a therapeutic experience for a lot of people, there's like an openness that happens right away because you have to establish trust in such a quick amount of time. um, that I made some really close relationships from those experiences.
How do you think that being a dominatrix expanded your life?
Ooh. Um, I think that it gave me more perspectives on different people's like not necessarily um, judging a book by its cover, so to speak. um, where I was like, okay, at the time I'm like, I'm a young woman. I'm meeting with a lot of older men. Some of them are like in the corporate industries or like government industries. And it's like, we on paper have nothing in common. But then once you get to know someone on such a like intimate level, you either do have a lot in common or you can find really interesting elements of each other. And so it taught me in a lot of ways to be open to people completely, no matter what. And not to the point where you allow yourself to get walked all over or allow for like inappropriate things to happen, but more in the sense of like people come from all walks of life. Um, there's always like some interesting part of someone that you'll relate to, even if it doesn't seem like it at first glance. And so it gave me a lot more patience, especially as someone who was like in my early 20s at the time. Like everything feels so fast paced when you're at that age. It taught me to sort of slow down and have more meaningful relationships with people that I wouldn't have necessarily geared myself towards.
And I wonder, what do you think are some of the misconceptions about the industry, and what do you wish more people knew?
Hmm, that's a good question. I remember a couple years ago, Netflix came out with this like mini series. I think it was called like Bonded or something like that. And it was this like quirky mini series about a girl that worked in like a dungeon. And so it's a little bit different than what I was doing because I was like freelance. So I would essentially like rent a dungeon anytime that I had a session. But there are some folks that will work in dungeons. So they like go there and they almost have like a 9 to 5 where a client will come in, they'll fill out a survey. These are the things that I want to do. It either corresponds with what you offer or not, and then if it does, you get paired up. And so it was like her quirky experiences working in a dungeon, and so much of it felt like a parody of the industry, where a lot of the fetishes were like played for like cheap thrills, where it was like this person's into like puppy play, for instance. Like, isn't that so wild and weird? And I think that there is like a lighthearted humor that a lot of clients and like DOMs even will approach the work with, where there's like delightful aspects of it. I'm thinking in specific, there was a podcast that I used to listen to called Sex Nerd Sandra, and she would talk about all these different aspects of sexuality. And she had one episode where she brought a DOM on, and the DOM was talking about how what was her like weirdest session ever, and there was a client who wanted her to take what was it called, baby powder, and like tie him up and then like threaten to baby powder his entire body. And he was like, no, no, please, like very, very dramatically. And so there is something like wildly delightful about that in its like strangeness. Um, and so I wish that that show, and I wish that a lot of people more generally approached that sort of thing with like more levity and open-mindedness and understanding, rather than like pigeonholing people that like do sex work or go to sex workers for specific things, because like the like variety of like clients and requests and interests and people's backgrounds, like you would not believe. It is just so varied. um and so I think that it tends to get diluted down into like really specific boxes, like anything. But yeah, that's what first sort of comes to mind.
Yeah, a little bit of what we're talking about here reminds me of when Raf James White said, never yuck someone's yum. Don't kink shame. There's a broad variety of things that people are into. And yeah, I suppose in any kind of niche industry, there's the temptation for outsiders to almost parody it, or to, in their
Mhm.
mind, it becomes an archetype or a stereotype. But obviously, it's much broader than that.
Yeah, I um there's a film festival in Montreal that happens every year called Fantasia Film Festival, and it's like a genre festival. And there's a lot of really great indie films that will get picked up by larger distributors at this festival. And one of them that I had seen a couple of years ago was called Cam, and it was I think it was picked up by Netflix.
Really good
This
film.
phenomenal film. It's about a woman who's a cam girl, and then all of a sudden one day she wakes up, she can't log into her account. There's already someone who is her exact doppelganger who's streaming on her account and doing things that progressively she would not necessarily do. And so it's like about her experience trying to reconcile this. And the uh, writer director Issa Mazet had been there because it was like I think the international launch, and she had created this film from her own personal experiences as working as a cam girl, and I loved that perspective. It felt really authentic, and so I had reached out to her after the movie, and then we had become sort of like vaguely online friends. And the weird roundabout way in which the world is wonderful, she ended up reading Coup de Grâce and blurbing it, which was really nice. Um, but yeah, the world is wild and wonderful in some ways.
The film absolutely is on Netflix because that's where I first watched it, and goodness, it's a wonderful film. I need to rewatch it because it has been a few years now, and I'd love to talk to her on the show at some point because it it got a moment, but you know, where a lot of people were talking about it, but it seemed to be very fleeting. So we need to bring it back. We need to get that in the collective consciousness because yeah, I mean, you talk about authenticity and putting something out where it's truly the vision of the creator and could have only really been written or created by that person.
Hmm.
It's Cam.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also like some of the work that I find most resonates with me is like work that could only have ever been created by that specific person at that specific moment in their life. Um, there's some weird serendipitous crystallization that happens where it's like you're almost channeling something external. Um, where, you know, at least like for myself, like people go back and ask me like, how did you make this thing? Or, um, you know, the same question will be asked to other people. And it's almost like I did it because I had to at the time. Like this, you had to exercise something from your body.
Yeah, this is how I feel every time I read something by Cassandra Core or Eric LaRocca. They
Yes.
both feel like they could only have been written by those two amazing and talented individuals at that particular moment in their life. And that's why they're an instant read for me in both instances.
Hmm. Hellbore is very good. That is Cassandra's next book.
Yeah.
The Library at Hellbore. Fantastic. I love a battle royale. It's one of my guilty pleasure as like a sort of subgenre.
Well, there should be no guilt involved in any any battle royale enjoyment. On the page, maybe there should be a little bit of guilt if it's literally in person, or quite a lot of guilt. But we don't need to talk about that on the podcast. We don't need lawsuits or criminal investigations.
That's
So
another phenomenal Japanese film.
it is. It absolutely is. Let's
Big
move on.
influence.
Yeah, yeah. Let's move on to what are you working on at the moment?
I have my hands in so many different pies right now. I don't know if that's because of like it's so easy to externalize it as like the state of the world. There's like so many things going on that I find it hard to narrow my focus. Um, but I think one of the other things we touched on this a little bit earlier, but one of the next things that I want to work on or that I am working on is like debut novel stuff. And there is so much pressure that goes into the title of a debut novel because it feels very make or break, at least in like traditional publishing or my understanding of traditional publishing. Um, and so I'm working on a bunch of different things. There's like a novella that I'm working on right now that feels like it has some similar roots to Coup de Grace. Um, it's set in the early aughts, and it is about someone who meets someone in an online chat room, and as their relationship deepens, they sort of form a pair, like a codependent relationship with each other. And as that relationship blossoms, the main character's world literally starts to close in, where it's like his reach to the outside world is limited to his block, and then his building, and then his floor, and then his apartment, and then his body. And then it's like, what happens when you're robbed of everything because you're so focused on a relationship that you don't realize is toxic at the time. Um, so that's like one of the things that I'm working on. And then I have a zombie novel that I'm working on. And then I have a non-genre um, book that is set on Titanic that I'm working on. I have a deep hyperfixation with Titanic and everything that is sort of like the early 1900s, the early 1910s. Um, but that one requires a lot of research. So I'm trying to take my time with it.
Well, the Titanic one in particular might be particularly anxiety inducing for you because I understand that you have a fear of objects underwater.
I do. You've done your research. I have what's called submechanophobia, which is like specifically man-made machinery underwater. I don't know why. My brother also has this phobia. I'm like, did we experience a mutual trauma when we were children? Um, Weirdly enough, it's not like old rusted things. So like that's fine for me, but seeing like a fresh turbine underneath the water sets off my fight or flight for some reason. Um, so I don't know. I have to like examine that one more.
I mean, if you did see, in your own words, a fresh turbine underwater, what do you think your reaction would be? And with the fight or flight, I mean, would you get out of there? Would you freeze up? What would go on?
I get like a weird flighty sort of panic, which is when I was 12 and 13, I had it in my mind that I wanted to do synchronized swimming. I don't know why. My mother indulged me. Um, And so there's these like massive Olympic swimming pools that you're like practicing in that are so deep because you're doing so many different like acrobatic tricks underwater. And the like warm up every day is like they throw the rings down to the bottom of like the deepest part of the pool, and you have to like hold your breath to go and pick them up and doing laps and all these things. And the panic that I would get getting near a drain, um, I'm thinking of like Chuck Palahniuk's
As
like
soon
haunted
as
story,
soon as you said that, I was
which
thinking
is just
of
like
Guts and like, oh god, this is the
collective.
ultimate horror story for you.
We have like collective trauma over guts. Just everyone who's ever read that short story. But yeah, just absolutely traumatic. And I don't freeze up. I get really like flighty about it, where I'm like, I gotta swim out of here as like quickly as possible. Um, there's not like many other things in my life where I feel that sort of animal baseline primal panic. Um, I don't know. And it like a lot of the time it doesn't make sense. It's like a pool cleaner. I'm like, it's not gonna do anything ominous, but it's a weird distortion that happens underwater. I don't know. I was a child, easily influenced.
Uh, Maybe something will come to the forefront of your mind one day and you'll realize this was the moment, this was the incident that set it all off. But yeah. I mean, some people, when they have a fear, they would go for immersion therapy to try and overcome it. But I mean, your fear is so specific. It's like, how many situations are you going to be in where that's going to come up
Oh my god,
anyway?
Michael, you have no idea. There was like one time during the pandemic where because of lockdown, I had to furlough my jewelry production team. And so I was like producing all of the jewelry myself, which was just like a nightmare amount of work because when everyone is under lockdown and cannot spend their money on traveling and weddings, they online shop, which was great for the business, but just like I was so much jewelry production. And then I had this one day where I was doing so much jewelry and it's like 8 o'clock at night. I'm done like a 12-hour shift. I'm rinsing off the last pieces, and then one of the pieces fell into the drain, and so I had to like shut off the tap, and it got stuck in the sort of like U pipe that's underneath the sink, and it took me like an hour and a half to like muster up the courage to open up the pipe to get this gold pendant out because I was just like, I can't get near the pipes. They like scared me so much, and I knew that that was irrational, but I just had to like hype myself up for so long. I was exhausted by the end of that day, but I don't know. That's immersion therapy for you.
That is a very unfortunate situation, let's say, to find yourself in. You said that, yeah, your brother also has this fear. I hope that your partner doesn't as well, because then at least if your partner doesn't have the fear, then should something happen, they can
Yeah, he can
intervene.
go and
If they do have the fear, then rather than it being genetic, it then almost becomes this terrifying, is it a virus? Anyone you get too close to, they kind of contracted it. We've gone a little bit it follows with that idea.
yeah. What's that? Oh my god, it's literally like blanking out of my memory, but it's like the Canadian zombie film where it's like words, it's infection happens
Oh,
through words.
I yeah, it's gone for me too,
Pontypool.
but I know what.
Pontypool.
Yes, yeah, Pontypool. An
But yeah.
another very good and underrated film.
hmm Canada represent.
There you go. Well, I asked you what you were working on at the moment, and you mentioned, the novel being the next big milestone, but it sounds like from your answer there are multiple novels. So, it that'll be the next thing. It's like, well, which one is the debut novel? And in terms of that conversation, in terms of putting a debut out into the world, do you have an agent? Is that mostly a conversation with the agent? Are you representing yourself? Do you go to Titan because you've got that pre-existing really good relationship and they're a phenomenal publisher? Or do you kind of send multiple novels to multiple people and see what the universe delivers back?
Mhm. Titan definitely gets like first dibs, and I'm talking with some folks for representation. But I want to have like a completed thing ready to present. Because you got to go off the momentum, you know.
So you've got the Titanic novel. Is it a novel or is that one a novella?
That one's a novel. I had.
Okay.
It's like such a bizarre sort of like side through line, but I had like a writing partner a couple years ago, and we were just writing stories for each other, and then at one point we were like, let's write entire books for each other. And I had started this project, and I was like, I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to create this entire box of like things that would have been found on the Titanic that have to do with this book. um, and it was really cool. I like posted a video about it on TikTok, and it went viral. And then I was like, oh, I guess I have to finish this book. There's like 30,000 words of it that are done. I just need to like complete it. But because it was written like for specifically one other person, it doesn't necessarily make sense narrative, like structure wise, because it's like connected universes to the stories we're writing for each other. So I'm like, okay, it has to stand alone on its own 2 feet, as like, I don't want to create an unintentional series. There can be Easter eggs. I think that that's fun. Um, but that's why it's taking a little bit longer.
So you've also got the zombie novel. I suspect, just based on your work, that it's probably not a conventional zombie novel, or there's gonna be a twist. There's going to be some layering. I wonder, is there anything you can tell us about that one, or are you kind of keeping it under wraps? And then linked to that, I'm wondering logistically, seeing as you have multiple projects on the go, Is there one project that you're actively writing now, and then when that's complete, you'll move on to the next? Or is it literally as wild as, like, right, Monday is Zombie Day, Tuesday is Titanic, Wednesday, guess I haven't done any metalsmithing for a while? What is it looking like?
Sometimes it is that, but I try not to have that be my routine because there's like you need to get into a certain voice, especially if it's like more historical work like Titanic. There's a certain vocabulary that I have to be using that all of a sudden, if I'm writing something more contemporary, like the chat room story that takes place in the early aughts, like I can't be using that sort of slang in the Titanic novel. Um, so usually when I'm like working on one thing, I try to really buckle down and work on that one thing. The reason why I'm like playing a little bit more is because I'm more in the like outlining stage of a lot of these. Um, so I sort of follow the muse, so to speak. I am mostly working on the Titanic one right now. The zombie one is earlier we were talking about first works. That's the book that I had fully written and then put on the back burner because I was like, I need to revisit this when I have more skill as an author. And so that was finished in 2020. And now I have like 5 years worth of life experience and author experience to sort of go off of. And it's also been like 5 years worth of writing notes in my phone where I'm like, oh my gosh, like this character makes sense now. These things are related to each other. Um, and so what I need to do is have a bunch of sticky notes and like have a crazy wall full of like thread connections with each other so that I can figure out what to throw away from that novel and what can stay. But it's an interesting process.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated by all of these, and yeah, the chat room one as well. I mean, immediately that does make me think a little bit about Eric LaRocca. I feel like he's the chat room, or
Hell yeah.
like kind of any sort of communication medium master. He's the master, he's the mistress, he's the fucking god of it all. And yeah, I'm so into that kind of thing as well. There's almost something a little bit epistolary about it. It's
Mhm.
experimental storytelling. So I'm very much looking forward to that one too.
Yeah, I loved Things Have Gotten Worse. And then
Oh yeah.
more recently, I read Wrecked, which was like also in sort of forum storytelling.
You you read Wretch?
Wrecked.
Ah,
I'm
Wrecked. Wrecked.
wrecked. Let me.
It's
Um,
Wrecked by Eric?
no, it is by
Oh,
Alex Gonzalez.
okay, it's because yeah, Eric has a
Sorry,
forthcoming
I
story
ping
called
ponged.
Wretch. So then, because
Oh
it
yes,
was
yes, yes.
so similar, the word, I don't
Yeah.
wait. Yeah, because that was
No,
a
no.
surprise too. Because I don't what I didn't think he'd even finished writing it yet. You read it
You're
before he
like,
finished. What's going on? Liminal spaces becoming reality. You're reading works that haven't been finished.
I wish, I wish. Um, yes, Wretch, the like Cassandra story, also interests me, even though it's not written yet. But sorry, the author name sort of like um, escaped me. Wrecked, Rekt, which is like told in sort of forum format, which I
Mm.
think is really interesting. I think that's coming out later this year, but I love to see how people approach epistolary storytelling in different ways, um, especially since the internet has so much history now that we can pull off of, where it feels very distinct of certain eras. Like I'm thinking back on the novella that I ended up writing for Crystal Lake. There's like some of that story has to do with Twitter. And I'm like, oh, it's not even Twitter anymore now. So that really dates it to a specific time in history.
Yeah, my forthcoming novel has a reference to Twitter, and I wondered about changing it back, but I don't. No, this is a story set in 2023, basically, and as specific as that is,
Yeah.
it's like
Chased wetter.
I'm just keeping it, and there's some people that hope that eventually, then the social network now known as X will change hands again.
The
So
revert.
yeah, basically it will become Twitter again. So just
Yeah.
hold on to that thought, but I don't
Everybody's
know.
author bios with the links at the back. That's like, find us on Twitter. It'll be like relevant
But
again.
yeah, it's interesting that I decided to keep the reference to Twitter within the story, but in the author bio, yeah,
You're
I've
like,
said you could where you can find me on
this guy.
X, but yeah, uh, I don't know. I feel that probably whatever the dominant social media form is going to be, it probably doesn't even exist yet. Like I think all these things like Blue Sky and Threads, they're just kind of Twitter clones. So
Mhm.
whatever it is that really taps in, I think it will be different to whatever we have seen, something we can't really conceive of, or like you kind of said at the start, it's going to become so fragmented that there never will be a
Mhm.
predominant one anymore. It'll
Mhm.
revert more back to the kind of old internet days where we have our little niches and our little forums, and maybe it's not such a bad thing, particularly if you it then means you don't have the equivalent of everyone's having fun at the party and then some asshole walks
FOMO.
in and they're like, fuck
Dude,
you, I hate everything you stand for, why do you exist?
like, I don't even know you.
Yeah, it's like, what are you doing here? Get out. Jesus Christ.
Someone kick
Uh,
this guy.
yeah. Well, thank you for spending the vast majority of your evening chatting to me. This has been a hell of a lot of fun and really informative. So I do appreciate you taking all this time.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so glad we finally got to talk. I'm like, honestly, as someone who's been a fan for like 5 years, I'm like, I feel so delighted that we finally got to talk. So thank you.
Yeah, and you have please got to keep me informed as to what's coming out next because I would love to chat with you. I know that Bob would love to chat with you too. He's very upset to be missing this one, but he's presently ghoulish, so I'm sure that he's having fun in some capacity, maybe on the
It's a worthy
yeah,
reason to miss. I wish I
yeah.
was a ghoulish as well.
I wish I was at ghoulish.
Oh yeah.
Maybe people listening also wish they were at ghoulish.
Yes. All in spirit.
But where can people connect with you
Uh
in
I
this
will just say,
fragmented world?
yes, in this liminal world between Twitter and whatever is coming next, I can be found at Sofia Ajram on whatever platform you're probably on. That's the trick. You just keep the same handle.
It's a good trick.
Mhm.
Well, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
Oh my gosh. That's it really. Keep on trucking. It's a hard world out there. Make the art that you want to make. Do the shit that you want to do. We don't know how long we're going to be here for. do do the things that bring you joy, like we said earlier. If it doesn't bring you joy, you know, maybe it'll bring you life lessons or a dollar. I don't know. We're getting too existential. It's getting late in the evening for me.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.